Welcome to Chapter 3 in our Self-Change Project book. This chapter is titled Self-Knowledge, Observation, and Recording. So what we're going to be doing in this chapter is learning different recording techniques for our observations of our bad behavior. We might accidentally do our good behavior as we're recording our bad behavior, and we would want to record that behavior as well, so good and bad behavior. But really the focus at this point is on doing our bad behavior, as we always do, and then recording it so that we can figure out why we're doing it, the antecedents to it, the consequences to it, and all of that. So observation and recording is a very important step in the project. So we are going to learn a bunch of different techniques for recording, and ultimately you're going to kind of be piecemealing these different techniques together to create your own recording system. But as we go through the lecture, we're going to do some lecture activities where I instruct you to try the different systems out. And just keep in mind that we're just trying them on. We're kind of playing with them to see which ones work best for our project. But they might not actually make sense for your project, the ones that you're going to be doing today in the lecture. And so if they don't, just try it. And then you don't actually have to use that recording system when you are recording your real observations. So just keep that in mind. Just because we're trying them out today doesn't mean you're committed to them or that they'll actually work their way into your project or you'll use them. So let's go ahead and get started. So for lecture activity 1, I would like for you to turn to the back of the book where the subject index is and look for words that are kind of in the wheelhouse of what your project is about or what your target goal is. So, for example, look up, assertiveness if you're trying to be more assertive. Look up healthy eating if you're working on nutrition or losing weight. So the exact terminology might not be back there, but you can look for synonyms. And then for lecture activity number 1, if you could just give me a list of page numbers for the words that you got from the subject index that related to your project. And so it can be, 3 page numbers, 5 page numbers, however many you can get. But I want you to turn them into me, but also I want you to have them so that you can kind of reference back to those pages for ideas on how to design and implement your project as you create it going forward. So for lecture activity 1, just give me a couple page numbers of words that or subjects that are relative to your project. All right, so it's very important that we get a good understanding of our bad behavior. And if we accidentally do our good behavior during this run of observations, then we want to get a good understanding of our good behavior. So we want to specifically be able to observe ourselves, record those observations formally, and then identify antecedents and consequences of those behaviors. So we can't just try to remember our behavior and write it down because, as we've talked about before in this class, our memories are not always accurate. And one of the reasons for that is because of our ego. Sometimes our ego kind of conveniently forgets and then replaces details of our memories with ones that are maybe more flattering. In fact, in one study, college students were asked to remember their previous grades, and they were able to remember accurately their good grades, but they forgot or didn't recall or didn't state whenever they got C's and D's and kind of more typically bad grades. And so did they really forget, or did their ego just kind of omit that information from their brain? So this is just kind of a fun side note, but because our memories are wrong, we are often wrong in our self-assessments. Here are 4 common things people are wrong about when they are doing self-assessments. People tend to overestimate their skill level at something they're bad at. They tend to underestimate the extent of certain health risks that they engage in. They tend to overestimate their educational attainment, and people in general also tend to overestimate their level of competence at work. So we can't really rely on our memories for our self-assessment, so instead we have to observe ourselves in real time and try to record as close to those observations as possible. So when I say record, I just mean write down our observations, but we need to do that in a formal way. So in this chapter, we're going to learn a bunch of different formal systems for recording our observations. Okay, so let's talk about the mechanics of recording observations, or kind of the basic rules. So When do you want to enter your observations into your formal recording system that you're going to make this week or today? You want to do that as soon as you realize you've performed the undesired behavior or didn't perform a behavior that you want to perform if your project is about starting something like playing the guitar or something like that. So again, we want to write down our observations as soon as we realize we've performed an undesired behavior or didn't perform a desired behavior. So we also want to write down observations when we realize that we had a success. At this point in the project, we don't want to actively try to change because we want to be able to look back on these set of observations as baseline data so we can see exactly what is causing our bad behavior, and then we can correct it. So in order to figure out what exactly is causing our bad behavior, we need to write down the circumstances surrounding the bad behavior while it's still going on without actively trying to change it. So it's important to record our bad behavior as soon as possible. So right after it happens, ideally. The longer we take to record our observations, the less accurate they will be. And you also, in your observations, when you're writing them down, you want to be sure to describe as much of the situation as possible, the physical setting, thoughts, social situations, other people's behavior, weather, what you ate, how much sleep you got, anything at all that you think could be contributing to your behavior. The more you observe and write down, the more you will know what you need to do to change. So be very detailed and specific when you are making these recordings of your observations. All right, so the first recording system that we're going to try out today is called a structured diary. And so we're going to try it out using your project, and if you like it, great, you can include it in your actual self-change project. But if not, then you can just do it for today's lecture activities and then kind of disregard it. You don't have to use all of these methods in your actual project. So the structured diary is a record you keep of your target for change and also its antecedents and consequences. So we want to start thinking about what situations affect our behavior. And we need to keep in mind that our thoughts, feelings, and behaviors can be antecedents, they can be target behaviors, or they can be consequences. So one of these antecedents can, or behaviors or consequences can lead to another, right? So there's kind of an interchangeable, cyclical, or interactive relationship between the antecedents, behaviors, and consequences. So what we want to do is first identify the behavior that we've observed and put that down in the middle column under the B for behavior. And then we want to think about what came just before that behavior happened, and that's going to be our antecedents, and we want to really be as detailed as possible. So this example is actually not really as detailed as yours will be, but in the antecedents you want to, again, think about anything that could have triggered you, even unconsciously. So you want to think about the things like the weather, your biology, what you've eaten, right? If you're not feeling well, things in the environment. Were there loud noises? Was it super hot that day? So you want to try to be as detailed as possible when it comes down to your antecedents or the triggers of your bad behavior. Remember the 5 W's approach. So when did it happen? Who were you with? Where were you with? Where were you? What were you doing? Etc. And then after you write down the antecedents, you want to write down the consequences. And so what happened as a result of B, and was it pleasant or unpleasant? Was the consequent pleasant in the short term? For example, you eat a cupcake, and in the short term, the cupcake tastes really good. So that's a consequence. You feel a little sugar high and a little bit happy because you had a delicious cupcake. But in the long term, the consequence is that, your jeans fit a little tighter. So it's not as positive as a consequence or as pleasant. So write down the consequences of that behavior. And then that would constitute the column C. So I want you to go ahead and try this method now. It will be for lecture activity number 2. So you're going to have 3 columns. You might choose to make a table in Word. Otherwise, you can just kind of space them out. But anyways, you're going to have 3 columns, A, B, and C. And then what I'd like for you to do is think back to a recent time that you did your bad behavior, Or if you're trying to start doing something for your project, like start writing poetry or start exercising, then I want you to think back to a time when you had an opportunity to do this new behavior that you want to start to do, but you didn't. Okay, so think back to a time where you did your quote unquote bad behavior or had an opportunity to do your desired behavior and didn't. And then I want you to put that information in column B. And I want you to think about what happened before that behavior and think about things like your biology. Were you sick? Were you tired? Were you hungry? Things in the environment. Was it really hot that day? Did you sit in a lot of traffic? Did you get in a fight with anyone? Did you listen to punk rock music? So think about any antecedents, any triggers for that bad behavior. And then put those in the A column as detailed as possible, more detailed than the example I gave you. Because the more details you have now, the better off you'll be in the long run for this project. So we need details, details, details. And then in the consequence column, don't forget you could put short-term consequences that are pleasant, right? Because we need to know what feels good about your bad behavior. What are the pleasant consequences? Even though they may not be good for you or healthy for you, they must feel good, otherwise you wouldn't be doing them, right? Like people that do drugs, they do them because in the short term it feels good, and that's for them a pleasant consequence. Of course, we don't mean healthy or good. We just mean that's for them a pleasant consequence. That's why they're doing it, because it feels good. So you're going to put the consequence in C, and if it's short term, you can put that, and if you can kind of anticipate what the long term consequence would be, then also put that down for me. Okay, so you're giving me one example, and that's going in the A, B, and C column. And for this particular activity, just so you can see how it feels to fill out a structured diary and the method behind it, you're going to use your memory to fill in the structured diary. And if you can't remember a recent time you did your bad behavior, then maybe it's not the right choice for a project, because it should be something that's happening often enough that you can do this project about it. So for this activity, we're filling out our structured diary based on a memory of our bad behavior. Hopefully when we do the project, if you choose to use the structured diary method, when you record your actual observations, you'll record as close to when they happen as possible. Depending on what your topic is for your project, you might want to record how much you actually do your bad behavior. This can give us a more realistic understanding of our behavior. And so counting is how you would record the amount that you are doing a behavior. And so you can record that behavior in terms of frequency or duration. Frequency is a simple count of how often you do something. And so you could do a frequency count of the number of negative thoughts you have each day, or how many drinks you have at a party. And so it might not be practical if you are counting to constantly like have a notepad out or a formal recording system and be writing in it all the time. So you may need to have another way that's more discreet to record your frequency, if that's the method that you're choosing to use. So you might want to like keep a tally in your cell phone and then copy it to your actual recording system later. Another thing that we can use is duration, and what's cool about duration is that it can help us see what we are doing instead of the behavior that we want to be doing. So this is really good for people that are having a hard time starting doing something. But some examples of duration would be recording how long you spend at the gym, for example. And then if you want to do a more sophisticated version of this duration count, then you could do a row for minutes at the gym and then have another row for minutes actually exercising. If you start to observe that, like you go to the gym, but then you just talk the whole time, you might want to write down how many minutes you're actually exercising so you could compare that to minutes at the gym. Or you could see if you actually studied for 45 minutes or did you daydream for 40 minutes and study for 5. Are you eating too fast? How many minutes does it take you to eat a meal? So these are things that you could use a duration count for. And another thing that counting can help us with is to see what's interfering with our goals. For example, you could keep track of the days you exercise and then ask yourself what makes you work out more on some days than others, and then see if you can't kind of adjust around those obstacles. So, for example, if you're keeping track of the days you exercise and then you realize that you exercise on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays, you can ask yourself, What makes working out on Monday, Wednesdays, and Thursdays easier than other days? Why is it easier to work out longer on Thursday? Are there TV shows on Tuesday that are preventing you from going to the gym? Maybe you could plan to record those. Maybe there's a yoga class on Thursday, and that's why you go for so long on Thursday because you really like it. And then you might have the idea of signing up for more yoga classes. So we're going to use what we get from our recording systems to help us formulate our plan going forward. And these counting recording systems can be a really great way to have some quantitative data that we can make into charts and stuff, and kind of easily see any progress that we make. So you are going to have the requirement of having numbers of some sort in your recording system. So this would be one way to get those numbers. Okay, so for lecture activity 3, I just want you to make a frequency and or a duration recording system. I just want you to tell me what you would put in the columns and in the rows. Don't fill it out because we're just practicing like how you could use this for your project. It might not work for your project, but try to be creative and just give it the best shot that you can. You might be surprised at what you could record this way, and some students are, and then they actually end up incorporating counting into their recording system, even though they thought maybe it wouldn't be useful for them. So that's why we try every recording system out, just in case one actually would really work well for us. So again, just tell me what you put in the columns and in the rows, but you don't have to fill in the individual cells with numbers or anything like that. We just want to see how you'd set it up if you use this in your project for lecture activity 2. So although right now we're trying to collect baseline data on our bad behavior, recording only our failures can be pretty discouraging. So if we have a visual representation of our negative behavior, it can be shocking and overwhelming. It can cause us to doubt ourselves. We don't want to overly focus on the negative, but if we do, it can cause us to actually stop making observations. So one thing that we could do if we worry that we're sensitive to this possibility is to record positive behaviors as well as negative. So you might want to record all of the times you avoid temptations. For example, smokers can record all of the times that they avoided lighting up. You might make a list of desired behaviors and mark your successes, like you see on the slide here, where an X equals a success and an empty space technically equals a failure, but it doesn't look as bad because it doesn't draw the eye to the focus on the failure. And then finally, like I said, you can record successes and failures. And so for an example of how you would do that, depressed people can record the times they think positive and the times they think negative. So what I would like for you to do for in-class activity 4 is make a positive self-recording system. If you'd like to make a positive and negative self-recording system, you're welcome to do that as well. So what you want to do is kind of break down your target behavior into sub-goals, and then put those sub-goals in the columns like you see here on the slide, or on the previous slide. So it gave you an example of a person who is trying to lose weight. So they broke down that target goal into some sub-goals like avoided sugar, exercised, stop eating at 7, only eat 3 meals and 2 snacks. You could add things, of course, drank lots of water. So have some columns with some sub-goals in it, and then I'll be able to see how you're going to do your positive self-recording if that was a method that you would choose. So this is in class activity number 4. If your target for change is an emotional reaction like depression or anxiety, then it would be very important for you to rate the intensity of your emotions. Recording only the times you feel that emotion isn't going to tell you anything about what you need to do to change. But using a scale to rate the intensity of the emotion will allow you to consider the emotion in terms of the situation, thoughts, or behaviors. So, for example, you could rate your level of stress on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is super stressed and 1 is super relaxed, every day, and then consider what happened the days you were more stressed, and consider what happened the days you were less stressed. Another thing that really helps with these emotional ratings is to include comments. So if you are rating overall general emotions like depression, you might want to rate your emotion 4 times throughout that day. And then each time you do a number rating, you leave a little comment about the details of the situation, what thoughts you were having, what were you saying to yourself, what was going on in your environment, how are you feeling physically. So you can add those type of comments next to your rating system. If you're rating emotions in terms of situations like anxiety, then you can rate your emotion after each situation occurs. For example, like if you have social anxiety, you can kind of rate your emotion after the party or wherever the place was that you were having the social anxiety. And then in the comments, write all about the situation and try to note antecedents and note them as soon as they happen so that you don't forget. Okay, for lecture activity number 5, I would like for you to make a rating system for the intensity of your emotions. So even if you don't feel that your project has an emotional element, I'd like for you to really dig deep and try to think of one. Even if your project is to start running, there might be some emotions involved with that, like not being motivated, being discouraged, being bored. And then, of course, for most of us, the emotions associated with our project will be pretty apparent, especially if it's like depression or anxiety or negative thinking or something like that. So anyways, figure out for this activity one emotion that is related to your project, and then draw out a rating system for rating the intensity of that emotion for lecture activity 5. And I'll need you to show me in the rating system the time. So just like you saw on the slide, on the example slide, I had breakfast, lunch, dinner, and bedtime for time. You can do it that way. You could do it daily. You could do it twice a day. It's up to you, whenever you think is best, dependent on your project. And you'll also need to, somewhere on lecture activity 5, tell me what the rating system would be. So what would a 7 represent? What would a 1 represent? Or if your scale is not 1 to 7, if it's 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, what would those anchors on the scale represent? So I'll need to know that. And then do leave a field for comments. And again, these recording systems, with the exception of the structure diary, which I asked you to fill in, the rest of these, the counting one and this one, you don't have to fill anything in terms of observations. I just want to see how you would set up the recording system. So show me that for lecture activity 5. Okay, so this is a list of the recording systems that we went over today: the structured diary, the counting, including the positive self-recording system, the frequency and duration, and then the ratings of emotion, that numerical scale that we had done on the previous slides. So these are all of the different types that we went over. What I need you to do for the last lecture activity number 6, is to combine the different recording systems into one that's customized specifically for your project. So make sure you use a minimum of 2 different kinds. So you could do a structure diary and a positive self-recording, or a structure diary and a rating of your emotions, or a frequency count and a rating of your emotions. So whatever you want to do, a minimum of 2. But more is better. Be really sophisticated here when you're making your recording system. This is the one that you're going to use officially in your project going forward to record your observations. And so you are graded on sophistication. So make sure that you are setting up your recording system so that you're going to get as much data about your bad behavior from your observations as possible. And remember that you do have a quantitative requirement, so you need to have some form of data in the form of numbers. So you have to collect some data in the form of numbers. That could be your rating system, your frequency count, your duration count. It's up to you which one you want to use, but make sure you work that into your recording system. So be creative, and that is your lecture activity number 6. Okay, that is it for chapter 3. So be sure to complete the assignments associated with this chapter and turn in your lecture activities. I'll see you for the next one. Have a great day.